Hi there, I'm Paula Jameson, and I'm coming to you from Public Media Network in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And we are going to have a discussion today with Bill Courson, and he is the Dean of Students of a new school of Ayurveda in the Kalamazoo area called BVI, School of Ayurveda. And Bill is going to share a little bit about this ancient healing tradition with us and hopefully expand our horizons a little bit about what's out there in the wide world of healthcare. So Bill, welcome. I'm so glad to see you.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Would you tell us just a little bit about Ayurveda?
Surely. The word Ayurveda in Sanskrit means the science of life, although in the context that we use it in, it means the science of longevity. How does one enhance life's quality by remaining at an optimal level of health? How does one elongate life at an optimal level of health? So that is what Ayurveda is.
So it's really looking at life in a very holistic way, not just about being sick and getting well.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Ayurveda doesn't define wellness as the absence of disease. It defines a person as an individual whose physical self is balanced, but who is self-established, who is joyous in their outlook and enthusiastic in their attitude. So it's not only physical health. It's the enjoyment with which one pursues life.
That's lovely. Well, I have behind us this beautiful logo that comes with the school, and it actually is a good way of leading into our conversation
yes,
today.
It is. Yes, it is.
Could you tell us a little bit just about the three different plants that are on the logo?
Those are three herbs that are used in Ayurvedic medicine. You recall our conversation about the doshas, the various bioenergetic forces that perfuse the body, that hopefully are in balance, but sometimes fall out of balance. Those three herbs are three principal herbs that are used for reestablishing imbalanced doshas. I think they're Amalaki, Ashwagandha. I'm not quite certain about the third one, but those are three widely used herbs. I'm not sure what the third one represents, but those are three herbs that are used to promote balanced energies within the body.
And this brings up the important subject of today's conversation too, because we are talking about these three aspects or energies, you're going to say more about it, that are called doshas.
Yes, that's right.
And can you say what they are and why they're so important in Ayurveda?
When we use the word dosha, we use it in a variety of different ways. You may, or may, if you're a person involved with or interested in Ayurveda, have asked yourself the question or have asked of someone else, what is your dosha? Okay. In that sense, the word dosha means a constitutional psychophysical type.
Okay. Okay. And in fact, I remember years ago, Deepak Chopra wrote some popularizations about this tradition.
Indeed he did.
And I noticed online too, you can still take quizzes about what is your dosha.
Yes, you can. You can. The doshas are three in number. We call them by Sanskrit names, Kapha, Pitta, and Vata.
Okay.
Now those words are portmanteau words. They're collectivities. They don't refer to single things.
Okay.
When we talk about Vata Dosha, the earliest European translators of it translated the word Vata as wind.
Okay.
It's not wind. Vata Dosha is all of those processes within the body that promote communication, movement. Whether that movement is the coursing of blood through the circulatory system, the movement of lymph through the system of lymphatic drainage brought about by the contraction of the muscles, the coursing of neural impulses along their nerve conduits, the inhalation and exhalation phases of respiration, the beating of the heart, the movement of food through the alimentary canal, the elimination of wastes from the body, childbirth, the menstrual flow. All of these are instances of movement. There's also another type of movement, immaterial in character, the movement of thoughts, ideas, feelings and perceptions and emotions in the mind. Where there is movement, there is Vata. So Vata is all of the collective transportative facets of the body's functioning taken together. That's Vata Dosha.
So that conjures up all other kinds of associations too.
Indeed it does.
And would those associations also play into one's understanding?
Well, yes, they would. We say that Vata has certain characteristics, obviously motion being an important one of them. It has other attributes, coldness, dryness. So we look at the dosha as being something that promotes motion, but that also has a drying effect on the tissues of the body, that has a temperature lowering effect on the state of certain structures within the body. The same holds true of the other two doshas. The second dosha is Pitta Dosha. That's with two T's, not to be confused with Pitta, one T, the Middle Eastern
bread
that comes along with hummus. So Pitta Dosha is all of those functions of the body that are of a transportative character. Okay, I'm sorry, excuse me, transformative character, that changes the chemistry of substances, that changes the food that we eat from an extremely complex stew of macromolecules into much simpler constituents more easily utilizable by the body for either tissue building or for the expenditure of energy.
What we would call digestion, basically.
It's digestion. Digestion is another word for Pitta. When you hear Pitta, think digestion. But it's more than what we think of as digestion. It embraces digestion, but it also embraces nourishment on the cellular and tissue level. You know, there's two phases to digestion. There's the gross digestion that occurs in the alimentary canal, as a result of which wastes are thrown off and the resulting nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream and then it's distributed to the tissues. But there are other kinds of digestion. There is the digestion of sensory impulses. What we hear, what we taste, what we smell, what we feel, what we see. Let me use the idea of vision or sight. When we watch something or look at something or something enters our visual field, hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of quanta of visual information traverse our eyes, traverse the intraocular gelatin known as vitreous humor, hit the retina, the photosensitive lining of cells in the back of the eye, and traverse the optic nerve to the brain. Those signals that are entering the body are extremely complex. Indeed, as you know, they're reversed. We see tops as bottoms and bottoms as tops. That information is digested, and it is a process of chemical digestion, not terribly dissimilar to what goes on in our bellies. When we take in information, it is broken down from an extremely complex structure into simpler, almost digitized information, more easily utilizable by the body. That's Pitta Dosha.
And that's interesting that we've got the digestion that we associate with digestion that's very physical, but this other level, which we might associate more with information processing or sensory processing, but it's the same thing really that you're talking about, same metaphor of digestion.
Take the word processing out, put the word Pitta Dosha in.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this Pitta, in addition to existing at the level of the sensory apparatus and in addition to existing at the gross digestion, also exists at the cellular and tissue level, as does Vata Dosha. If things are moving outside the cell and inside the cell out, that's motion, that's Vata. Just to give an idea of how thoroughly pervasive these doshas are. The third dosha is called Kapha Dosha. And it too is a portmanteau word. It means many things. It means all of the bodily processes that lead to tissue growth and augmentation, as well as lubrication. Okay? Very important. Wherever you find a great deal of Vata going on, such as the chest cavity with respiration, the beating of the heart, the coursing of blood through the major blood veins, through the major arteries and veins of the thoracic cavity. There's a lot of movement going on there. Movement engenders friction. Friction engenders the need for lubrication. Wherever there's a lot of Vata, there's a lot of Kapha. So Kapha is the tissue augmentation and lubrication function of the body taken together. Use a Western term for it, you could call it all of the facets of anabolism. Okay? So those are the three doshas. That's, in essence, what the doshas are. But as I said a few moments ago, we use it in different ways. If I ask you, what's your dosha? I'm not asking you, how's your transformative and communicative functions?
How's your metabolism today?
Right. What I'm asking you is, what is your predominant dosha? We have all three doshas throughout our body, in every part of the body, all of us, all the time. But these three doshas are present in a certain proportionality. An individual may be monodoshic, where they have one dosha that's really prominent and two trailing off in the background.
Now, is that more or less common, do you think?
It's about a third of the population.
Oh, okay.
Then you have individuals, maybe a little more than that, who are bidoshic, who have two doshas in the ascendancy and one trailing off in the distance. And then you have a few individuals who are tridoshic, where all three doshas are present in relatively close proximity to one another. And depending on what dosha or doshas are prominent, that can give us a certain physical conformation. There are people who look like typical Kaphas, Pitas, and Vatas. It gives us a certain physical conformation. Most importantly, knowing the predominance of the dosha, of a dosha or doshas, gives us detailed information on what an individual has to do to stay healthy, what an individual needs to do in the event that health is lost, what is an individual's vulnerabilities, what are the ways most likely that this individual is going to encounter health challenges, and what are those likely to be. And lastly, if they do encounter those health challenges, how do we treat them? How do we deal with them? Because you may be a Vata Dosha, and you may come to me complaining of arthritis, and I will treat you or make suggestions in a certain direction. You may be a Kapha and come to me complaining of rheumatoid arthritis, and I will make suggestions in a wholly different direction. Because in Ayurveda, we consider not only the disease, the rogi, we consider the patient, the roga.
So there is not one protocol for treating a condition is part of what I'm taking away from that.
Ordinarily, there are many. Ordinarily, there are many. If you come to me complaining of arthritis, I'm going to ask you and I'm going to examine you to see what symptoms are prominent and what your predominant dosha is. And on that basis, a protocol would be suggested, yes.
And would you say that, again, with this whole interrelationship of mind and body and spirit that seems to be such an important part of Ayurveda, that these physical tendencies and predominances also lead to certain habits of mind?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely.
Say a little bit about what might be associated with which type, if you could.
Well, all right, I will. When you look at a person who is predominant Vata Dosha, very often you'll see a person, let me do the physical then the mental.
Okay.
Very often you'll see a person who is unusually short or unusually tall. Often not a lot of color to their eyes or hair, a more subdued color. Very often not a well-developed musculature, not a great deal of not a great deal of meat on their bones, which in some callings can be advantageous, you know. You can be Vata and be a great ballet dancer. You can't be Kapha and be a great ballet dancer. So the thing of it is they're light. That's one of the gunas, one of the attributes of Vata Dosha. They tend to be what we call regularly irregular. They they have difficulty conforming themselves to schedules, rhythms, and patterns. They sleep when they're tired. They eat when they're hungry. There's sometimes a great deal of difficulty in accommodating oneself to the hours of the clock. If they had a default dysphoric state, it would be anxiety. It would be anxiety, you know. You think of the little animals, the prairie dogs or the meerkats, very alert and scanning the perimeter for predators.
I'm thinking of the rabbits I see at my yard.
Rabbits, yes, a wonderful example. Yes, yes, yes. They're skittish, I think is the word, okay? Now, in terms of their mental capacities, they tend to be very intelligent. They tend to be extremely creative. They're very, very good at giving form to formless ideas, perceptions, emotions. They're fabulous writers. They're very good in the plastic arts, the visual arts. Very often they're performers. Very often they're musicians. They tend to be extremely acute sensorially. Their hearing, their sight, their smell, their taste is very acute. If you know someone who said, "You were wearing cologne 3 days ago," they're probably a Vata Dosha, okay?
Yes, okay.
They're extremely sensitive to cold weather as a general rule. They don't do well in cold weather. When they do become ill, the illnesses that they develop tend to be of a neurological character. They tend toward dysregulation of the nervous function. They also tend toward disorders characterized by a loss of tissue density, such as osteoporosis or osteomalacia. They tend toward conditions in which there is a dehydration of the tissues, such as in certain neurological diseases like multiple sclerosis, where there is a sloughing off of the fatty coating of the nerves, the neurolemma. They tend to develop disorders where spasticity is a characteristic, such as Parkinsonism or benign essential tremor.
Because of that tightness that happens.
Yes. They're not very dense. They're very porous. There's very little insulating them from the outside world. Their tooth enamel tends to be unusually thin. Their bones tend to be fragile. That's what a Vata looks like. That's what a Vata looks like.
Okay.
A Kapha, let me go from one extreme to the other. Kaphas tend to be people with round bodies. They're not very physically active. You know, we like to joke and say, if you want a Kapha to do his exercise, tape the channel changer to his feet, okay? They don't tend to be active. They tend to be extremely sedentary. They love to eat. They enjoy sensual gratification of any kind, taste being one of the more important of the senses they like to gratify. They tend to be extremely nurturing as individuals. They tend to care a great deal for their families and friends and loved ones, and tend to be very nurturing and supportive.
I'm thinking kind of the Earth Mother in a way.
The Earth Mother, Santa Claus, yes. They tend to be thick-bodied, they tend to be portly, they're round, they have round bodies. They are, when they do become ill, they tend to develop disorders of which stagnancy is a characteristic. For example, pyloric stenosis, the failure of the stomach to empty itself of contents. They tend to develop diseases characterized by neoplastic processes, by tissue augmentation, tumors both benign and malignant. Because of their stagnant character, they tend to develop cardiovascular and cardiopulmonary disorders, and they tend to develop disorders of the digestive tract that are of a hypofunctional, downregulated character.
Because they're, unlike the Vata with all the movement is not as, sort of in a way, almost as natural to this.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
They are pretty much the polar opposites of Vata Dosha types. They tend to, consonant with the idea of stagnancy, they tend to procrastinate. Emotionally, I guess you would have to say their default dysphoric emotion is depression. Depression and withdrawal. Okay. And in terms of their vocational profiles, they tend toward what we would call the helping professions. They tend toward the various counseling professions. They tend to be health workers. They tend to be teachers, and they're interestingly enough, for all of their impediments, they tend to be among the longer lived of the three doshas.
Isn't that interesting?
And they tend to have the most well-developed immunity of the three doshas. They're very dense. They're very resistant to what's on the outside getting in.
There's sort of a hardiness there in a way.
There's a hardiness and a kind of you could almost use the word resiliency, but resiliency implies movement, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that with Kapha dosha, but there certainly is a degree of physiological resiliency. They tend to be survivors. Betwixt the two, kind of, you have Pitta dosha. Physically, Pitta doshas tend to be mesomorphs. They tend to be of moderate bodily shape and musculature. They tend to have a very high level of energy. They tend to be the directors and the managers and those who get things going in a certain direction. When balanced. When imbalanced, they tend to be the authoritarians, the despots, and the dictators. But balanced, they tend to be very good managers, very good at organizing disparate forces to achieve an end. Very goal-directed, very intelligent, at getting things done. On an emotional level, can appear abrupt even when they're not trying to be abrupt. Can be a little bit on the abrasive side. The type of person who would say, well, here, if you can't do it I'll do it myself. And of course engender your offense at that. That simply is Pitta being Pitta. You know? In terms of their emotional state, when they are out of balance, they tend toward anger. Oftentimes you will, not oftentimes, but quite often you will see an imbalanced Pitta who quite involuntarily and quite unaware of it, their hands will ball into fists as if to fend off any imagined aggressors, you know. They tend to have extremely high levels of energy. They can keep going without stopping. Resistance-wise, their resistance to disease is pretty good. They have strong appetites. They can eat, you know, wildly divergent diets and still be fine. But when they do become ill, they tend to develop diseases that are of an inflammatory character. You know?
Heat.
Yes, exactly, heat. They tend to develop disorders of the bloodstream for a host of reasons that we don't need to go into, but let's just say there is an affinity between blood tissue and Pitta dosha. They tend to develop disorders that are characterized by an upregulation or hyperfunctionality, particularly with respect to digestion. They tend toward inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's syndrome, ileitis and colitis, but really any kind of infection, blood diseases, disorders of the serum and plasma, the liquid components of the circulating blood, skin diseases, infections, both bacterial and viral as well as fungal. So those are the characteristics of Pitta dosha.
And just to go back, because it's really easy hearing this to say, oh, well, this sounds like a dreaded word, stereotype. But what you're really talking about is kind of a classic sort of set of qualities that probably no one person would have all of those.
These are not discrete categories, but stations along a continuum.
So it's a spectrum in a way.
It's a spectrum, and it's like looking at a color scale. It
Okay.
goes on to infinity because the spectrum is both horizontal and vertical. As with colors, you have colors and you have darkness and light.
Tones
It's
and
a
shades,
huge spectrum. It's a huge spectrum, you know.
And when you talk about dosha, is a person, do they come into the world with a basic pattern of doshas that's going to remain constant, or does it evolve over life or change?
The answer is both, but by definition, those are two different things.
Okay.
And I'm going to have to lapse into Sanskrit for a second.
I can take it.
Okay. There's two words, prakriti and vikriti.
Okay.
When you are born into the world, you have a certain doshic signature. You have so much kapha, you have so much pitta, you have so much vata.
Okay.
That is your prakriti. The word means nature. That's your constitutional baseline.
That's the given in a way.
That's the given. It is the result of your familial genetic inheritance from your mother and your father and generations long gone. It's your genetic inheritance. It is also the result of non-genetic inheritable traits, soft inheritance, or as they're calling it these days,
epigenetics.
epigenetics,
Yes.
exactly, a word that we've seen a lot over the past couple of months. It is the result of the mother's and the father's physiological and psychological state at the time of conception. It is the result of the mother's physiological and psychological state from conception until delivery. It is a result of environmental conditions inside and outside the womb, both the in-womb and out-of-womb weather, in other words. It is, if there is some trauma that is effectuated during the pregnancy, it could bear the results of trauma. It is the result of what we call karmic factors, where undischarged karma could impact upon the state of health or the physical or psychological conformation of the individual. So those are the things that come into play when we talk about what you were born into the world with. What's your doshic baseline? What's your doshic signature? Things can happen over time to change that. Okay, we can decide to eat 8 rather than 3 meals a day. We can decide not to exercise. We can decide to smoke cigarettes. We can decide to lead superlatively healthy lifestyles.
Or we can be in conditions of great deprivation.
We can be in conditions of great deprivation. We can be in conditions of psychological or physiological stress. Things can happen over time to alter that relationship between the doshas. And we call that altered relationship the present state of the individual, as distinct from their birth signature. We call that present state Vikriti. So we have Prakriti, the constitutional signature, and Vikriti, the current state. The measurement of the distance between the two is the work of the Ayurvedic practitioner, as it is also the work of the Ayurvedic practitioner to make suggestions for the rectification of that difference.
So closing that difference.
Closing the
yeah.
gap. Under normal circumstances, one's birth signature, one's prakriti, represents an optimal state of health. Okay. The mere fact that one's doshas are out of balance, however, does not mean that one is ill. If one's doshas are out of balance, that means that the stage is set. Get ready, something's going to happen, probably sooner rather than later.
Okay.
Because almost as soon as the doshas go out of balance, what happens, and this is something that can be explored at length another time, digestive efficiency falls. What happens if digestive efficiency falls? Food doesn't get digested. Rather than the bodily tissues and components being supplied with nutrients, they're starved. And partially digested and undigested food accrues initially in the alimentary tract, where it undergoes a process of quasi-fermentation, and over time is ground down in size to a macromolecular and ultimately molecular size. It's so small you can't see it, but it's very much there, and it's living in your alimentary canal. Sooner or later, it's going to leave the alimentary canal, and it's going to enter initially the lymphatic system, then the interstitial fluid, and then the circulation. And it's going to ride the circulation like a rider riding a horse until it finds a stopping point, a site of deposition. It is there where disease begins. You're not just talking about imbalanced doshas anymore. You're talking about an actual physical or psychological disease. What happens at that site of deposition? Well, think of the errant dosha that has been deposited there as a very adhesive, very viscous, syrupy type of concoction.
Could we use the technical term gunk?
That's as good as the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit, it is actually a mixture of the dosha, the errant dosha, and the toxins that have been riding the circulatory system, like a rider on a horse. Yes, gunk is what it is. We call it or ama. Okay, and it's going to stop at a certain point. It's going to stop at some process within the physiology or some part within the anatomy that has been rendered weak or injured as a result of previous disease or injury, but every chain has a weakest link.
Sure.
Okay. So it's going to stop there. What's going to happen when it stops there? The cells at the site of deposition, which up until that point had been leading their happy little cell lives, absorbing nutrients through their membrane, which was a differentially permeable membrane, extruding cellular wastes through their membrane, they're going to become enmeshed in this errant dosha mixed with and the cell membranes which had been differentially permeable are going to become differentially impermeable. What does this mean? What this means is that nutrients can't enter the cell efficiently. Wastes can't exit the cell efficiently.
So there's a level of blockage in a way that's going on, to put it coarsely. Yes.
All pathology is cellular pathology. All disease, barring broken bones, snake bites, and traffic accidents, begin at the cellular level. It is exactly there where disease begins. And it is exactly there, fairly long along the process of disease formation, that Western biomedicine is trained to detect the presence of disease.
Spotting, for example, a tumor or a cyst or
Yes.
some sort of infectious process,
Yes.
maybe even?
Yes. When the conditions preceding to that tumor, cyst, or infection had manifest themselves at some point in the more or less distant past. So.
Yeah. So you as a practitioner, that's where, I mean, that's one of the points where you could be called in to help address what's hopefully become very clear to the individual that something is out of balance.
Something's not right.
Something's not right, yes.
Initially, before we get to that level where there's actual pathology present, there are premonitory signs and symptoms, generally of an indistinct, vague, non-intense character. I'm just not feeling right. I just don't have an appetite. I'm not sleeping well.
The kind of thing that and I don't mean to disparage our current medical system, but the kind of thing that you would probably never take to your doctor because your doctor would just sort of say, I can't do anything with this, unless it's something that's really...
He or she would perhaps say, there's nothing that I can do with this. Go to the gym a couple more times a week, which is not a bad idea.
Right.
Get a little more fresh air. If they're a good doctor, if they're a bad doctor, they may silently decide that you have a Prozac deficiency and write you a prescription. So it really depends.
Yes.
It really depends. But no, very few individuals would take this to their doctor.
Right.
And this is the point at which the process could be arrested cheaply, easily, and quickly. And that is why in my practice, I emphasize client education. I'm not here to give you pills. I'm here to give you a little bit of training in how you can enhance your health and enjoy yourself more fully. It's all about empowering the client.
Yes, yes. Which, again, is a little bit of a shift for a lot of people in our society, although there's also a real hunger for that, I think. There are a lot of people out there that really do want to know how to respond if they're feeling that something is off, and yet they know kind of instinctively that this probably, it's not a point where they're going to be able to take it to a doctor.
What I'm seeing is there are a great many students in Ayurvedic programs of study, both formal programs of study, such as is the case at the BVI School of Ayurveda here in Kalamazoo, Michigan, at other schools as well, but a great many, what I will say, self-directed students of Ayurveda who are interested in taking a greater measure of responsibility for their health and for their family's health and for their friends' health. Many of those become Ayurvedic practitioners. And lest it sounds as though I'm being critical of Western biomedical physicians, I'm not. I recognize that Western medicine has its strong points and its weak points, just as Ayurveda has its strong points and its weak points. But what I do find is a considerable number of those physicians are hungry for more information on Ayurveda so that they can incorporate its principles into their practice and make themselves more valuable to their patients. I find this among a number of the allied health professions: physical therapists, occupational therapists, acupuncturists, chiropractors, veterinarians, respiratory therapists. There's a great many individuals throughout the entire panoply of the allied medical professions who know that this could powerfully augment the impact that they will have on their patients' lives.
What is your sense of people going through these Ayurvedic training programs? Are many of them doing this for their own sort of informal empowerment and for the people around them? Or are most of them planning on practicing on some level as a consultant? Or
my experience, which is necessarily limited, would tell me that about a third of them are undertaking it for their own enhancement, because they want to improve their own health, because they want to be more attentive to their family's health, because they want to be more helpful to their friends, and the remaining 2/3, I would say, have some intention of becoming Ayurvedic practitioners, but that intention of becoming Ayurvedic practitioners may take the form of simply establishing an Ayurvedic practice or grafting Ayurveda on as an additional modality to a pre-existing health practice. For example, chiropractors.
Ah, yes.
There are many chiropractors, there are many graduates now of chiropractic schools who, for their own marketability, need to do something to add something distinctive to their practice, offering their patients Ayurvedic care.
Yes.
Would in most states fall within the ambit of their scope of practice as defined by law. You see the same thing with physical therapists who want to utilize Ayurveda's physiotherapeutic modalities, manipulation, heat, cold, and so on. So yes, I would say that most want to become Ayurvedic practitioners either in a freestanding Ayurvedic practice or as an add-on to an existing healthcare practice. Interesting thing, those who do enter the study of Ayurveda with the intention of being, their own family, friends, their own little circle of care recipients, tend at some point sooner or later to become Ayurvedic practitioners as the concentric circles around them widen and family tell friends and friends tell other friends, and you wake up one morning and find that you have a retinue of clients.
Now, there are people, and that you really recognize that there's a need there on a whole wider level.
Yes.
Now, is there something in Ayurveda that would be akin to the Hippocratic Oath in Western medicine?
There is described in one of Ayurveda's scriptures. I believe it is our foundational surgical text. And Ayurveda did evolve, embracing surgery. It was a surgical discipline, and I think it is in the. It is in one of our foundational texts, in which there is described a ceremony, a rite, in which there are certain readings done, certain propitiations made to God or the gods, depending on your theological perspective, in which the students are read certain obligations of the person undertaking medical study and to which they agree. So it's not exactly an oath, but it's very much like the Hippocratic Oath.
There's a sense of a pledge on some level.
It's a definite liturgy, and it's formal, and it's witnessed. Yes, yes.
So it is a socially recognized transition,
Yes.
even though, as you have said before, that in America at least, Ayurveda doesn't have the licensure status that allopathic medical practitioners have, but yet there's still this sense that this is a role that you're undertaking in a wider world.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
And the licensure issue will probably evolve as the years pass. And when Ayurveda makes a sufficient dollar impact in the healthcare marketplace, for that's often what it comes down to, probably licensure will come into existence. We don't need it to practice if we're careful about our words and the way we present ourselves to our clientele.
Right.
The chiefest benefit of licensure would be safeguarding the public, because at this point in time, anyone who wants to call themselves an Ayurvedic practitioner can do so, can open an office to practice Ayurveda with absolutely no training or qualifications whatsoever. So the premier effective licensure would be as a consumer protection measure.
Exactly, exactly. But in what you're saying, there's a little bit of a caveat emptor for people that are interested, that if they are seeking this kind of assistance and consultation, they may want to look a little into the background of the person that's practicing.
You would want to have a conversation. I'm certainly
yeah.
not going to give a person access to my body and to my health if I didn't know something about them. Where were you trained? By whom were you trained? Do you have any publications? What does your clientele presently consist of? Have you treated my particular problem? You know?
Yes, yes.
And could you perhaps give me the name of a patient, which you have to be careful about for reasons of confidentiality.
Sure.
We're not bound by the
HIPAA.
confidentiality requirements of HIPAA
Right.
because we're not licensed, but there is such a thing as common law confidentiality,
Yes.
not to mention the traditional ethics of the Ayurvedic profession.
And just respect for the
And of
people that you're
course,
working with, yes. Now, tell us a little bit about your journey into this approach to healthcare, your personal journey, and maybe a little bit about how you were trained, since we're talking about that kind of thing.
Well, I have always been interested in alternative, traditional, and complementary medicine from childhood or from early adolescence. As a young teenager, I suffered terribly from acne.
Oh,
And we're talking about the late 60s, and my poor dear parents must have spent the then equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars going from dermatologist to dermatologist as my condition worsened. Until finally one day I was in the Avon by the Sea, New Jersey Public Library, and I picked up a book called Get Well Naturally by Linda Clark. And I was reading it, and it happened to have a section devoted to skin disorders, and there happened to be the narrative of a situation resembling my own precisely. So I said, well, I think I'm going to try to do what she says.
wow.
And I did. And within 3 weeks, there were no active lesions whatsoever.
Wow.
Within 2 months, there wasn't even a scar on my body, on my face. So I said, well, this is interesting.
How empowering, too.
If they don't know about this, what else don't they know about? And if they're wrong about this, what else are they wrong about? And this was coinciding with watching my dad die of chronic myelogenous leukemia, for which orthodox medicine was completely and totally incapable of being any help whatsoever, as I literally saw him fall apart in front of my eyes.
Yeah.
Okay, that was one of two of three precipitating issues. The second was when I retired from my previous profession in 1996, before I began Ayurvedic study and training. I was consulting with a client, not an Ayurvedic client, an accounting client, and we were complaining to each other of, how many headaches we had and how tired we were and how many colds we had caught the previous winter. And he said, Bill, can I ask you a favor? Can I take your blood pressure? I said, of course you can, Carlos. So he took my blood pressure, and I watched this swathily complected Peruvian gentleman turn as white as a ghost. He said, I'm driving you to the hospital right now. I said, well, why would you do that? He said, well, your blood pressure is 390 over 200.
Oh, my heavens.
I said, let's go. So I went to the hospital and was put on a beta blocker and water pill, and everything was fine. I achieved the blood pressure of a 24-year-old marathon runner without having to become one. However, the side effects of the medication were extremely difficult to deal with and very unwelcome. So I cast about for an alternative. A number of years later, in connection with another job, after I had retired from my previous profession, I met a young doctor from India who is one of our faculty now at the Bharananda Vedic Institute, Dr. Aparna Bapat, attended a seminar that she was given, and at the end of that seminar knew that this was what I'd wanted to do for the rest of my life. Coincident with that, I was placed by her on an Ayurvedic regimen, which allowed me to almost totally eliminate my medication and keep the blood pressure of a 24-year-old marathon runner. Needless to say, I'm not a 24-year-old marathon runner. So I would say those were the precipitating, things that brought me to where I am now. Coupled with the fact that Ayurveda is probably the most absorbing discipline that one could possibly undertake a study of, even a lifelong study. And one of the things that you quickly discover after you embrace Ayurveda is that you will be a student every day for the rest of your life. Probably you'll be a student half an hour after you've died, but it's an extremely absorbing discipline.
And again, you're seeing the world with very different eyes.
Oh yes. Oh yes. You tend to analyze things quite differently than would have been the case otherwise.
What was the most striking thing to you as you undertook your training?
how effective Ayurveda was, how quickly effective it was, and how it could make a huge change in the lives of individuals who had committed to it.
And when you say committed to it, this would be a long-term commitment, I presume.
Well, I'm talking about individuals who needed to make changes in their lives in order to regain their health. In some cases, in order to remain alive. So,
which would be a motivator, presumably.
it should be.
Isn't always, I know. But
Well, you know, Ayurveda is an extremely interactive modality that depends heavily upon the client's cooperation and proactive stance. This is not a healing modality where all you need to do is lie down on the table and remain immobile while the practitioner makes some passes over you with a magic wand, or you know, it's going to require a bit of work, sometimes more than a bit of work. It's going to require changes in diet, in lifestyle, in fitness regimens.
Well,
sometimes it will involve a change of jobs. I talked to a great many people who are very unhappy in their work, have been for years or decades, and it's taken a major toll on their health. And sometimes, you know, it's quite a change that needs to be effectuated.
well, and it sounds like there's a whole relational dynamic between the client and the practitioner then, too.
There is. Well, ideally there should be, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Indeed,
There would be some, I mean, not just the educational side, but it sounds like there may be, I mean, I don't really like this word, but the motivational aspect of what a practitioner might bring to the...
Surely, and if one is skilled, one can amend or tailor one's approach to the individuals. What will motivate this person? Ayurveda is rich in proverbs and sayings and aphorisms, and we say, speak gently to the Vata, speak frankly to the Pitta, and show the Kapha your stick. What does this mean? It means that the Vata is already frightened. You're not going to have to do a great deal to elicit their cooperation. And of course, yes, I'm indulging here in stereotypes that are not necessarily universally applicable, but you speak gently to the Vata, you speak frankly to the Pitta. If you want to elicit a Pitta's cooperation, you need to semantically key your therapeutic conversation to make them think that they're having the idea, that it's all coming from within themselves. Present them information, let them draw their own conclusions, and when they do, you say, well, that's a brilliant idea, you should really do that. And finally, with the Kapha, Kaphas are indolent, Kaphas don't want to move, Kaphas don't want to change. So you have to show them your stick, or spell out in no uncertain terms what the health consequences will be if they don't change their ways. You know, that's the point when you bring out the autopsy photos. You know, so that's the way Kaphas are. And of course, this isn't universally applicable. I'm just using extremes to illustrate the point.
But this brings us around, dare I say, full circle to this idea of the doshas, and that not only have you told us that there are certain sort of physiological predispositions, strengths and weaknesses that you as a practitioner need to be aware of, but that you would have a whole kind of therapeutic approach as a person, not just in what you dispense in the way of advice, but how you dispense it would be probably tailored to the different patterns that you're seeing in your different clients.
And I think that's true even if one isn't practicing Ayurveda. I think that's true of any practitioner of any healing art.
Well,
really.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Well, that's where a good experienced practitioner who started to have some real human skills, that's what they bring to the equation, I think.
Yes, yes. And you know, many Westerners who do study Ayurveda, virtually all, have their own Ayurveda story, just as I've told you my story. If you inquire, they'll all have a story, or nearly all have a story. And I sometimes wonder that for Western medical students, I sometimes wonder whether they would not emerge better physicians from their training if at some point early in their career they had gotten really sick and had gotten really scared. So,
I think there's, again, some at least folklore about the wounded healer and
yes,
how this
yes.
person is able to bring something to it that the young, healthy person who's never been sick a day in his or her life just can't possibly understand.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you haven't carried that particular cross, it's all going to be academic. It's all going to
Exactly.
be an arm's length kind of.
Well, Bill, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad you were able to join
Well,
us
I'm so
today.
delighted to join you. It's been a pure pleasure.
Thank you so much. I've learned a lot. I hope our audience has too. I am so pleased to have had you join us. I hope you come back again.
Well,
Again, I'm Paula Jameson, having talked to Bill Courson. We're at Public Media Network in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
Come
you so
back
much.
again. Thank you.